Okay, terrific. Okay, so my name is Andrew. I've been with Intuitive for about, I think, going on 6 years now. I've been working with the Workflow platform for going on almost 10 years. I'm a part of the Trusted Advisor program with Symantec for the Workflow and Service Desk platforms. And been doing primarily workflow development. It's front end, back end, start to finish business process for I guess about 7 years now primarily. That's been my focus. So like Paul had mentioned, whereas he's done many asset and management suite implementations, I've done the same with workflow over the years. So a lot of what we're doing with these webinars is we're taking specific customer requirements and use cases, and we're taking those ideas and concepts and we're putting them into just a webinar format just to show what we've done, what the platform is capable of, what we can accomplish with not only workflow alone, but as that ties into the notification server and semantic management platform technologies, and we can automate a lot of the day-to-day, whether that's from a technician or administrator perspective, or from a self-service end-user perspective, and even as far as just automating everything so no one touches anything, and then administrators can just review the results of that automation later on. So today we're going to talk about what is Symantec Workflow. We're going to take a look at what Workflow does, what we hope to accomplish with Workflow. We're going to talk about why automate operating system migration and why that's a useful application of Workflow's automation capabilities. We're going to talk about the different parts of this specific automation scenario. I'm going to talk about authentication, self-service, the assessment of the machines to ensure that they are in fact approved and ready for upgrade. Upgrade eligibility curation, which means simply that there is in this customer's environment an ongoing list of machines that need to be upgraded, and we're able to curate those both automatically and from an administration perspective. So we'll go over that in just a bit. Machine information review is basically checks and balances, ensuring that we're selecting the right machine before we click upgrade. Queuing for upgrade jobs and tasks, so we'll show how that integrates with Altiris's jobs and tasks engine. And then audit, so we want to take every action, every exception, every problem, every login that happens, and we're auditing that and saving that to a custom table, so that later any review that's necessary, whether it's troubleshooting or finding out who did what when, we can take a look at that and then act on that information. And then finally, administrative control. So we're going to show what administrators are able to do through the console itself. Okay, we'll start about talking about what is Symantec Workflow. If you've been on a previous webinar, then we're going to be kind of covering the basics again. I apologize for that. We'll go through it pretty simply and quickly here. But Workflow is basically a Visio diagram that is functional. It works. So we drag and drop components that are functionally actionable. It builds the code in the background at runtime and at compile time, basically how you've dropped it on the page and how you've configured it. So you drop a component on the canvas, you configure it, you lead data from one place to another, and it flows downstream however you've designed it to run. And the best part of workflow is its integration capabilities. So we can integrate with disparate data sources, web services, platform APIs. We can write our own code. I had mentioned that the components compile their own code based on input and configuration. But despite being, uncountable stock components, there may be one that you need that is not out of the box. So you can create your own component using a variety of coding languages. And then, of course, you can build in the generator libraries. You can build things such as SQL query components, web service callers. You can integrate with REST. You can integrate with flat files. You can create your own data types, things like that. So I'd mentioned it's a lot like a Visio diagram in that what you see looks a lot like a process diagram from start to end, and then everything in between is, as I mentioned, functional. So part of what makes workflow great is the reusable logic. So we can create models and create those once with input and output parameters, and then reuse those so that we don't have to build from ground zero code or workflow design. So what that means is a lot of times when we go into a new customer who wants something similar to what we built for a previous customer, we can take a lot of that framework and reuse it. And it's absent of any company information or data. It's just a framework that takes those inputs and drives that downstream. So with the modular components, that's very easy to very quickly ramp up a new customer with a similar project that we've done before. Another good thing about workflow is if we have one developer working on a project, it's very easy to annotate what's going on. So whether it's just renaming components to indicate what's going on inside, or using just plain text components to write that in. There's also documentation areas to just write a complete description of everything that this workflow is doing. So it's very easy. Even if you're not familiar with workflow development, you can go through start to finish, and depending on how the developer has taken notes or indicated what's going on, you should be able to tell, or I guess, pick up on what's going on within the workflow itself by just following the data stream start to finish. Another very important part about workflow is the front-end design capabilities. So it's basically a drag and drop, snap component to one component, snap components to another component, line them up on a canvas, that sort of thing. So it's a basic form builder type experience. And then in addition to that, you can build your own HTML. You can include your own custom CSS if you want to get past just the basics. You can make this as in-depth and as nice looking as you'd like. So you can focus on getting the data going from point A to point B to point Z, and then afterwards you can focus on user experience and user interface as well, using the HTML front end. So prior to releasing to production, within workflow you can automate your process in the debugger. So you can use test values, test servers, things like that, and you can debug your processes start to finish and watch it in real time. So basically the arrow moves from one component to the next, and if there's an exception that occurs, you can watch it happen in real time. You can mouse over and see what the exception is. You can set breakpoints and watch data as it happens in real time. You can even set a breakpoint and then change the data. So, for example, if you need to debug as a different user, you can intercept the data stream with a breakpoint and set a different user to see how this workflow is going to react as if a different user has logged in, just as an example. Okay, so that's a bit about workflow. Hopefully that was short enough for those of you who already know a bit about workflow, and hopefully enough information for anyone who's not familiar with the workflow platform. So let's talk about why automate Windows upgrades. So anyone who's familiar with doing a migration or an upgrade is probably already acquainted with the benefits of automation as far as that goes. Customer that we're working with, that was the, I guess the context of this particular webinar, wanted to take some of the complexity out of the jobs for the lower level analysts. So whether that's just help desk or level 1, sometimes they don't want them in the Altiris console at all. So what we do is a lot of times we will build front ends in workflow, provide the analyst exactly what they need to see, exactly what they need to do, and present that to them outside of the Symantec management platform. So this is what we did here. We wanted to take that out of the console and put it in its own custom platform. That way we keep the analyst on rails. It's very difficult to make mistakes because there's not a lot of options. There's not a lot of fluff or things to distract or even accidentally click on. Another good thing that this brought to the customer was the ability to bring self-service automation to end users. So by giving different URLs to end users and leveraging authentication, we can determine whether this needs to be a self-service process or an administration type context. So self-service is very easy to do as well. So end user needs to upgrade their machine, and it's basically a one-click and it's done. Okay, so we've already gone over a couple of these, but the main outcomes that the customer wanted was to really reduce the number of help desk calls and also the effort by the analysts that was required to go in and make adjustments to filters, review outcomes, and babysit the process while it runs. And they wanted to also reduce the time that was spent curating the eligibility list. So just as a bit of context there, the customer was maintaining a list of about 20,000 machines that needed upgraded, and that was being maintained by hand, a single document, by dozens of analysts. So an Excel spreadsheet being passed around between that many people it's destined for mistakes or inconsistencies. So what we did is we imported that into a data table and leveraged SQL calls to automatically upgrade that and also allow administrators to update whether that's adding machines to that list or removing from that list. So I mentioned also it reduces errors and typos, promotes standardization. So there's only one way to input the data. You can't add new fields. You can't type in text in a number field, things like that. So we're standardizing the data input to make that consistent across the board. Increase reliability and confidence in the upgrade effort. So what the end user sees is that they click and then the upgrade happens. What the technicians see is that they enter a computer name, press go, and the upgrade happens. There's no dropping the ball by help desk staff. There's no Well, I added to the filter, and I guess nothing ever happened. There's none of that confusion or question. And then additionally, the administrative staff wanted to promote the value that Workflow Solution brings to the Altiris platform. And this was, I guess, as they always say, the low-hanging fruit, the challenge, one of the main challenges that they needed to address at the time. So automation was a great way to address that. Okay, let's talk a bit about the process. So authentication is really only necessary if we're going in to manage the process. And a little bit about that is the customer has many branches, and those branches are sometimes franchised, and the franchisee brings in their own machine and is maybe just logged in as a generic user, whether that's user-1 or user-PC or just administrator. So there's no real way to audit who's doing this. So there's really no use for anything authentication in that scenario. So what we do is we just allow anyone who wants to click the link to click on it. And if they're eligible, so mean they're on the eligibility list, and if their machine is in the proper state, then they're going to pass right through. And we'll talk about what that state looks like here in a bit. Authentication for technicians can be whether that's just logging into Active Directory just to ensure that you are a member of the company, or even further than that, after you do log in, maybe we want to check a security group, make sure you're a member of some administrative security group that should have access to this, and that can all be configured up front. Okay, and we talked a bit about self-service already, so we wanted to make it very simple for the end user. So the end user basically clicks a link, and you can see it's kind of generic there at the top right, end user tasks portal. So this was intended and it is, I guess, in progress to be not only for Windows 10 upgrade, but for other end user tasks as well. So basically a landing page for self-service. At the time the screenshots were taken, it was Windows 10 upgrade, and that was it. So technically, we could have reduced this to just a simple URL click. Whether that's smart or not is, I guess, up to whoever's reviewing the process, but it is a possibility. In this case, we left it in. Land on the portal, click the upgrade link. All the session and environment information is gleaned from the computer in the session itself. So the end user does not have to type in anything. They don't have to enter any information. All we're doing is looking at the machine, looking whether it's eligible, and looking whether it is in the proper state for upgrade. That brings us to assessment. So being in the proper state for upgrade means that it is, for example, on the domain. We can resolve an IP address. It's on a supported operating system for upgrade. We want to make sure it's not already on Windows 10, meaning that obviously it's not going to upgrade to Windows 10. So there's a lot of different assessment and evaluation checks we can do here to ensure that not only is the machine ready to upgrade, but it's also on the eligibility list, and it's time for that machine to be upgraded. So in this case, the customer will send out to the different branches in a newsletter that, hey, your branch is ready for upgrade. When you're ready, click the link. And if they don't respond in a certain amount of time or it's not upgraded, we can send them a tickle email saying, hey, just a reminder, you need to click this link. Here's the link right in the email. Click it and go. Okay, so I'd mentioned earlier that we had an Excel spreadsheet that needed to be simplified and standardized. So we imported that into a SQL table, and that is being used to populate the table in this front end to the workflow. So what we wanted to do is allow for simple searching, because you can see at the top there, eligible targets, there's almost 20,000. So we wanted to allow for an easy search, whether it's by name, subnet. Uh, there are site IDs, things like that. So several different search criteria we can use. Once that's searched and you find the one that you need, you can then proceed to select that, take a look at it, make sure it's the machine you want, and then trigger the upgrade. We'll look at that in a bit. And also at the bottom, you can see there's an icon with a plus sign. That's just in case, well, we do a search for a machine we need to upgrade. For whatever reason it's not on the list, we can add and curate in that manner. Okay, after selecting one, we just take a quick look, make sure everything looks right. This is the machine we want. It's in the right location. It's a site that's been notified, hey, we're going to do the upgrade. Then we click the upgrade. And again, this is from the technician's perspective. So, maybe we've reached the end of the allowed, 4-week period or whatever we've allowed the branches to do their own upgrades whenever they're ready. And now it's go time. So we can just run through and upgrade anything that's missed by the end users in their self-service. So what we're doing when we click the button to upgrade, all we're doing is just queuing for an upgrade. And what that means is that that machine is placed into a filter that has been pre-configured as a target of an upgrade job. So there's not a lot of magic on the workflow side that's actually doing the upgrade. The only thing that we're doing on the workflow side is automating and providing a front end, specifically and most important for self-service. The actual upgrade tasks are still performed by Altiris. It's still auditable in the same way. It's still reportable in the same way. We're just simplifying the front end and automating the process. So once a machine has been added, if, for example, someone comes in behind, and like I said, they're just generic users, so many different users may use the same machine. They may use the same email account, branch100.customer.com. So anybody can log in. Anybody might see the email and try to, oh, we can upgrade. Click it. Well, someone may have already come in and done that. So we've got checks in there to make sure that we're not, trying to queue the same machine twice and common logic steps like that. So if it has already been queued, we can then remove it. For example, if someone starts an upgrade, someone comes in behind and says, we don't really want to do that. It's the busiest time of day. We got a really busy day tomorrow. Let's put this off for a few days. They can just remove it from the queue, which is, in effect, just removing it from the upgrade filter. Okay, and I'd mentioned earlier that we are able to audit all the actions here, whether it's an exception, whether it's an upgrade, whether a machine was removed from the queue, logins, we can track everything. So not only can we track that and then present it in a web form, we can also export and email that to whomever, and then we can build that email. Okay, administrative control. So I mentioned earlier that we can do things like add new records, remove existing records. I think I mentioned a few examples of why we would need to add a new record. So this is the administrative control here is basically, it allows administrators to curate this list instead of, whereas previously we were typing into a shared Excel spreadsheet. Now we're doing it programmatically. We're following exactly the fields that we need, and we can format or mask those fields. For example, for the zip code field, we can ensure that we type in 5 digits there, numeric characters, no text. We can even provide a state drop-down if you want to really make sure that the data entry is consistent. Okay, so this has been about Windows 10 upgrade, which has been a popular topic for a number of years now and continues to be. But the implications of this and the way that we're doing this, what we're calling queuing in this scenario, all we're doing is adding a machine to a filter. So if you think about what you do day to day in the Altiris console, adding machines to filters, adding filters to filters, think about all the reasons that you're doing that. Whether you are doing maybe a hardware refresh, maybe you're doing software deployment. There's the infinite number of things that you could do with this type of automation that is certainly not constrained to Windows upgrade. We did a webinar a few weeks back about patch management automation, where it was zero-touch patch automation, and that was very similar in that we were building filters and applying those to policy. So whether it's filters, targets, policies, we can automate all of the inclusions, exclusions, all the criteria for those through workflow. So don't limit the context of this to simply Windows upgrade. It can be anything you use a filter, target, policy for. We can generally automate, whether it's the input of information. Asset management is a good example there. So if we're moving an asset from one place to another, we can control the asset resource associations. So moving it from one location to another, moving a license from one user to another. So all just examples of what workflow automation can do. Okay, do just a quick show and tell about what workflow looked like. We'll take a quick look at the debugger, take a look at the live form. This was migrated from the customer, sanitized, and kind of integrated into my test lab. So everything may not work as expected. It may not work exactly like it would in a live production environment, but hopefully it will give you a good idea of what that's going to look like. Okay, so we'll take a quick look at the workflow backend. So as I'd mentioned, it's basically just a glorified Visio diagram that does something. So the best way to illustrate that is just to run through the debugger. And we're looking at the process for Windows upgrade right now in this workflow process in the debugger. Okay, so once that debugger is spooled, we can just start the process. And then we have some input values that are generally handled by URL format. So for example, we'll type in the URL, we'll type in the start page, and then question mark input parameter equals value. So in this case, manage equals true. And if we've selected manage equals true, obviously we want to handle some server-side authentication for that, but it's very simple as far as formatting the URL to get these input values in. Okay. Now, you see in the back end, arrow's just moving along, doing all the work. So we can watch it from start to finish. We can watch everything it's doing. Right now I'm just rewinding back through it, but it runs through in real time. You can see it's arrived at our form. And it displays the form with the data that it has gathered so far in the process, and then displays whatever we have built to display on the HTML page. So it works just like any HTML page or website would. You click a link, it proceeds to the next page. Here we can just type in whatever we want to search for. We can create a new link or a new record here at the bottom if we want. So we click that, brings us to the next page. You saw some of these in the screenshots. enter some new computer name, etc., etc. Tab through it just like any other page. When you're ready, submit or just go on back. If we wanted to take a look at some of this data at runtime, we just right-click, set a breakpoint. Run that again. And then when we hit that breakpoint, we can see all of the runtime data as it stands at this point in the process. So let's say, for example, we want to find out why maybe this list is reading 0. Well, we could set a breakpoint and we could check what's actually coming out of that, fetch targets SQL component to see if maybe there's something, maybe there's a misconfigured column name or misconfigured criteria that we're inputting, something like that. So very, very useful, very powerful debug engine for that purpose. And again, on the Altiris side, and this is a very simple demo because really there's not much to it as far as the user experience goes, whether it's a technician or an end user doing self-service. There's not a lot to it, and it was designed that way to be very simple. So really, all we're doing here is once we've added a machine through the process, it's just added to the filter. Now, this filter obviously can be targeted directly or indirectly, rather, through different jobs and tasks that then facilitate the actual effort that goes into upgrading that machine. So all the tasks that have been created, all the imaging jobs, things like that, can then be leveraged against this filter. So all we're doing in this case is using Workflow to curate a filter that is used to control the upgrade of all the Windows systems. Okay, as far as the demo goes, I don't think there's really a lot more. I guess we can take a look at it from the end user perspective. So in this case, we're just on a Windows 7, what we're going to call an end user machine. And this is all an end user sees. So we've got, for example, this link I've got in the bookmarks bar, but we'll just plant that in an email or a newsletter that goes out to the branches. All the end user needs to do is follow the instructions in the email, or we can put some instructions on this page if you want to, really, make it foolproof. Click the link, and in this case, it's already queued because it's already in the filter. So then we can go and remove that if we want. And we looked at a little bit of this in the screenshots. But that's it. That's the self-service end user experience. A single click and then an information page, and then they're done. They wait for the upgrade to happen. Now, in this case, we were allowing up to 24 hours for prep and things like that. But that can run as quickly as you want it to. I mean, it can even be, an instant task that occurs to run this upgrade. So it doesn't have to be staggered or pending like this. It can be something instant so that when they're ready to upgrade, they click the button and the upgrade immediately occurs or begins. Okay, I think that's the end of what I have there for the presentation and the quick demo. I'll open it up to if there's any questions or comments. Want to see anything else in further detail. Again, this is just in the test lab, so there may not be a lot that I can show that wasn't on Rails there, but okay. Well, Paul, I'll toss it back over to you to wrap up if you'd like.
All right. Thanks for the demonstration and your insights. I'd like to thank everyone for their time. If they have any questions or would like a further deeper dive and explanation of any kind related to workflow, please feel free to reach out to myself or Andrew to get that set up. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up a little early and give you back some of your time here today. Thanks, everyone, for joining. All right. Bye now.